I'm excited to launch into some perspectives on this channel that have been stimulated by a conversation that I had with my one follower. Hi, Adi. He lives close to me, and we were going to meet up and discuss some of this stuff, but he felt that he didn't know what the purpose of meeting would be because he was feeling some agitation around the assumptions that he's made about some of my belief systems. And language is a tricky thing because when we use words, we're in the realm of concepts, and everyone has a different association with what those words and concepts mean. So these kinds of conversations, especially to the extent that they are, they're charged conversations when it's about male-female dynamics. I think that, there's infinite room for nuance, right? And so I want to give just a little recap of why he was saying that he did not want to meet, and the agitation he was feeling and where that was coming from, and kind of make some distinctions here, because we live in a very politically charged landscape, one in which there's a lot of polarization, and I don't think that this is accidental. I think that social media, which I have stepped away from, has very much created a cultural climate of polarization on purpose, because this keeps people distracted from all of the power moves that are taking place behind the scenes politically. If people are spending their life force energy arguing and fighting, and to the extent that the greater division that can be created will keep people in this agitated limbic brain state where they're thinking in terms of either or, thinking in terms of black and white, thinking in terms of positions, thinking in terms of competition, and reacting from a sense of threat. All of this is the limbic brain. And so this guy Adi, I want to mention a few of his points and frame it all in future videos. I can't do it all today, but I want to frame all of the points in terms of the frameworks of the people that I am enamored with here. Barry Johnson, Terrence Real, DeMartini, Hellinger, and then there's another person I want to bring in at some point, Betty Martin with The Wheel of Consent. I'm driving. But before I do all of that and address and look at these issues that are coming up through those lenses, I just want to make a really, really important distinction. And so one thing that Adi was pointing out is that he's averse to any kind of gender politics, because ultimately, for example, the gender politics of feminism, because they are basically promoting a thought form of separation. They're based in separation, right? And I believe he's probably referencing Eisenstein's perspective that we need to get out of separation, right? And that is the purpose of this channel. So the purpose of this channel I'm getting clearer about is not just to heal the gender divide, but to see that healing the gender divide is absolutely critical if we want to reach the goal and the aim of becoming family again. And of course, what's inspiring this in me is that my family broke apart. I mean, actually, once you're a family, energetically and structurally, you're always a family. So that is just a fact. You're bound by fate, according to Hellinger. So our family didn't break apart, it just became more dysfunctional. But that the goal of this channel is to try to see how men and women can have more harmony so that we can all have a greater sense of belonging and feel like we're a family again. And I think that can happen not just on the level of nuclear families and the individual gender politics within partnerships, or with, even if it's just the partnership of co-parenting, but also on a broader scale, that a lot of the political upheaval and the atrocities that happen in our society happen by way of us treating other people like they're not fully human, or like they don't, and therefore that they don't really truly belong in the human family. For example, historically, women couldn't vote, they couldn't own property, they had very different rights, and as such they were not treated fully as belonging on the same level as men. And that is a historical fact. I don't think that's a distortion, that these types of prejudices do happen. and that those prejudices happen on a systemic and cultural level, and then people emotionally react to them, and then they also create these thought forms and these identity politics in reaction to them. But what I would put forward is that the identity politics, that I agree, they're problematic in the sense that they can be very aggressive. They can be coming from people who have a lot of judgment, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma. They can be very agitating, very antagonistic. There can be toxic forms of those. Nevertheless, identity politics and the cultural structures that exist that reinforce systemic abuse are not the same thing as systems thinking. I'm not actually interested in identity politics at all, other than understanding that it's a symptom of imbalances in systems. And by systems, I don't just mean cultural systems. I mean biological systems. So Hellinger's framework for systems thinking and many other types of systems thinking is not based in analyzing cultural systems. So like Hellinger's framework is based in the flow of energy within a whole system, like a family system, that's based in roles that result from the need for certain types of functionality, right? And some of that is based in biology, because biologically our differences with gender, with male and female, affect what our function is, right? Like women's function is to give birth. Men can't do that. Men are very physically strong. Functionally, their bodies biologically can do certain things that are not as easy for women to do. And these distinctions are important. And so the gender identity movement that I think has basically very much been amplified and polarized through social media, that is saying that gender is just whatever we decide it is, or that gender is purely a cultural construct, is not something that I agree with at all. I very much believe that hormones have a direct effect on our consciousness, and those who are changing their gender identity through the use of hormones are admitting to that as well. Otherwise, they wouldn't need the hormones to feel secure in their identity of the gender that they're choosing, right? But I don't want to get super distracted by this issue of identity politics that are based in the ways that people in our culture now are feeling that they can voluntarily change their gender. I don't want to go down that wormhole, because to me, that's not at all what the inquiry is about. It's not interesting or compelling to me. I have friends who are transgender. I have friends who are lesbians. I'm not racist or prejudiced against those groups of people, but none of that changes the fact that I am against gender transitions, especially in teenagers and children, and the way that that's culturally being pushed. And I absolutely think that it's being framed in a very sensationalistic way to suggest that children are going to commit suicide if you don't allow them to change their gender and take these synthetic hormones. That is a completely different issue. Gender identity is not what this channel is about. The fact that I am a female, and the fact that biologically as a female, I am vulnerable to pregnancy, and therefore structurally dependent on a man in a family system, is just a fact. And so systems thinking is looking at structures of function on a big scale as they exist. It's not based in any kind of ideology, and it's not moral. It's about functionality, right? So the premise in Hellinger's work is that when we violate the rules of love, which do have a structure that allows love to flow and function, then it's not a moral violation, it's a structural violation that affects the flow of the functioning of love, which acts as a force of harmony in families, right? And so I think it's really, really important to distinguish the way in life there are natural systems of order and coherency. And then there are cultural systems that attempt to create order and coherency, but in the process of doing so can create a lot of mayhem and a lot of discord, especially to the extent that they are out of balance with certain natural, biological, emotional, or energetic or social laws And then these gender and identity politics end up being backlashes and downstream effects when those systemic, those systems of function are violated, right? So I'm interested in the systems thinking. I'm not interested in as much in the sociological, cultural systems, other than to distinguish how they are out of balance with natural systems. And I'm not interested in, like, for me, feminism isn't about identity politics. I don't identify as a female, I am a female, right? So, and as a female with a certain type of biological system, in other words, an oxytocin-based system, I need affection, I need confirmation, I need all kinds of things to thrive biologically that are just a fact of my biology, right? And then, there's also all these identity politics around, like, how people, and like really infinite numbers of them, how people identify in their sexual orientation, or how, whether they're homosexual or polyamorous or monogamous, or, and then there's all these subcategories among the poly folk, and like all of that is, I must just be too old for it. I have no interest in it. I agree. I think that those types of identity politics, they get very cumbersome and they can get very politicized, and people can use them as a way to become a victim. And then the people who don't believe in those gender politics end up becoming victimized. Like the white cis male then ends up becoming a victim. And so what I would say to this guy, Adi, is that even that, you're feeling an aversion to this topic of feminism because of the gender identity politics associated with it, but by being averse to it, you have caved into identity politics, right? Because you don't want to identify with that. And I understand why. Like, I also don't enjoy or believe that many of those movements are healthy, but I think that, like, the ultimate issue around the tension that people feel isn't because gender, identity politics exist, but the tension exists from the way that our society has directly utilized identity and gender and used it as a means to manipulate and polarize and separate people. And if you're choosing not to engage in this topic of feminism because of how you associate that with identity politics, and you're using it as a means to separate and distinguish yourself, then that program of polarization has worked, right? And so it has succeeded in creating the division that you say you're against. And so I want to get to a much, much more fundamental level than all of that politicized stuff. Again, that politicized stuff is real. It's something that's in our society. Many of the points of the people who are in those movements are valid, but the tension and the division itself has been planted very deliberately. And the intensity and extremism of many of those positions, it has one purpose: to distract and divide. And if we allow that to happen, then we're not really into the unity politics that we say we are, and we're getting trapped in the identity politics that we say we're against if we reject that. So I'll stop there. I think I've ranted enough, and I'll address some of the other points in the next videos.